This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Do you play FanDuel and feel like you aren't creating consistent money-making lineups? Go over to the DFS Doctors on Twitter at the DFS Doctors and DM them with promo code Detroit Sports to get a free trial for their analytically formulated 70% lifetime profit rate NFL and NBA lineups. The whole purpose of playing daily fantasy sports is to get out there and compete and give yourself a chance to win. So go over to the DFS Doctors. Let them help you. They have analysts on staff that look at the best optimal lineup that you can put out there to win money. So why not take advantage? At the DFS Doctors, promo code Detroit Sports.
CBD is a game changer sweeping the nation. This hemp extract is the natural way to elevate your mood, eliminate aches and pains, reduce anxiety, and keep you sleeping all night long. It can even cut your workout recovery time in half. Get in the game today with 20% off all orders of CBD and lavender products from Lavender Lane, a lavender farm located right here in Milan, Michigan. Just go to lavenderlanemi.com today and enter coupon code Detroit for 20% off your entire order. Guys, look, these amazing products are infused with calming lavender to maximize their effectiveness, meaning your CBD items only take minutes to take effect, which is way quicker than those pills you were about to swallow. On top of it, they are perfect for men and women. Lavender Lane has lab-tested CBD creams, tinctures, and roll-ons that are perfect for any situation, even if you're on the go. Put your health back in your hands by heading over to lavenderlanemi.com and entering coupon code Detroit for 20% off your entire order of CBD and lavender products. What do you have to lose? Your satisfaction is guaranteed or your money back. So if you need lavender gifts for your loved ones or just looking for the natural way to ease your discomfort with CBD, go to lavenderlanemi.com and use coupon code Detroit to unlock these miraculous benefits of CBD and lavender. That's lavenderlanemi.com. And remember, use coupon code DETROIT for 20% off your CBD and lavender products from Michigan's own Lavender Lane.
Riddle me this. How the hell do you lose 4 games with this roster? Next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Carter. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Arbor back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. We will have our Wolverine Digest Roundtable with Michael Spath and Brandon Brown from Wolverine Digest and WTKA-Ann in Arbor coming up here. In the next segment, we'll get into football, huge win for men's basketball, the return of Isaiah Livers, and more. But we begin with this trend. Combine invites have gone out for the NFL Combine later this month. And one of the things I love about NFL draft season is all of our fan tropes get exposed. Because in the NFL, man, it stands for not for long with that horseplate. All they care about is winning. No sacred cows. They don't care about anything else other than, can you win enough games for all of us to continue getting mind-numbingly rich? All right? And so every trope, every excuse that's thrown out there in your social media land and on your message boards of your favorite team all get exposed. All shibboleths are stripped and laid bare during NFL draft season. And let's go ahead and go after the Michigan doesn't have enough talent, Steve. There's a talent gap. Okay, well, apparently the guys whose job it is to find that talent and then pay it millions and millions of dollars don't necessarily agree with that one, because the combine invites for the NFL Scouting Combine later this month have gone out, and lo and behold, look at this. LSU is the only college football program with more players invited to the Scouting Combine than the talent deficient Michigan Wolverines. LSU, the only team with more invites than Michigan. Mike Dana, by the way, draft eligible, not invited. So he was one of Michigan's better pass rushers this year. He's not even on the list. And this doesn't count underclassmen that we know a year from now are likely going to be factored heavily into the NFL draft process, like a Nico Collins, like a Chris Evans, like like an Aiden Hutchinson and a Kwity Paye, Ambry Thomas, the guys that are coming back for this fall, not on the list. So here's a question I'd like to ask. How the hell does the roster with the second most NFL Scouting Combine invites lose 4 games? 4 games, and by an average of 18.7 points per loss, by an average of 3 touchdowns. How? How does that happen? In 2016, we lost 3 games with that team. It ended up having the most players drafted from any school in the 2017 draft a few months later. 19 players off of that team ended up being invited to NFL training camps that summer. And that team lost 3 games. This year's team, second most invites to the NFL Scouting Combine, and it lost 4 games by an average of 3 touchdowns a loss. How is that even possible? How? That's a question we're going to ask Brandon Brown and Michael Spath here in a moment. If you like what we do here at Michigan Podcast and you want to support us in any way, please consider joining our Patreon page, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. All one word. You can use any dollar amount whatsoever. But if you are into sports handicapping, you want to get a hold of the picks that I put up there exclusively almost every day now that we're into college basketball season, and they're doing fairly well this season. You can get access to those for just $5 a month at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. I want to thank all of you, hundreds of you that are supporting us right now on our Patreon page. We appreciate your kindness. It definitely helps us to continue putting in the effort to put out Michigan Podcast every week. For the rest of you, please consider supporting us as well at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Welcome back to Michigan Podcast. Time now for the roundtable, courtesy of Wolverine Digest portion of the program. Brandon Brown and Michael Spath, both of Wolverine Digest and WTKA in Ann Arbor, joining us now here. Gentlemen, good to have you back with us. Thank you very much.
Yep, good to be back.
That was great. You guys both went at the same time, and no one heard either one of you. I loved it. All right, let's get right to it. All right. So Clay Travis over at Fox Sports has a trend that he says goes back almost a quarter century. 23 of the last 24 college football national champions had at least 2 top 10 recruiting classes in the past 4 years. Now, this trend predates Rivals and 24/7, et cetera, and ESPN. So he's including Tom Lemming. So he's going back, quite a ways here. And he says 23 out of the last 24 college football national champions had at least 2 top 10 recruiting classes in the past 4 years. For 2020, that's these 13 teams: Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson, LSU, Oklahoma, Texas, Auburn, USC, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Florida, and Michigan is on that list. Your instant reaction when you hear that, you see that trend. Michael, I'll start with you.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, if you don't have talent, you can't win, especially in today's college football. And if you don't have talent in coaching that knows how to utilize that, those players, then you're not going to win at all. So, I mean, I'm not surprised by it. Who's the one team that didn't have one of those top 10 classes? I'm curious to hear, but makes a lot of sense. And yeah, you got to do both. And the reason Michigan hasn't beaten Ohio State is because they have good talent and they have good coaching, but they don't have better than Ohio State in either one of those two departments. So that could just go all the way down the list. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Penn State, Brandon, did not make the list because they've had 2 top 11 classes in the last 4 years, but not 2 top 10. So what are your thoughts on this trend and what it means for Michigan to be on it?
Not a surprising list at all. I mean, when you started naming off the first, I don't remember how many you got through, 6, 8, 9 teams, whatever it was. It's literally every single team that's been in the playoff. I mean, I think you named them all. Washington, I think maybe Michigan State, I guess, would be not on the list. But so, yeah, I mean, it's not like, it kind of goes back to, as someone who covered recruiting extensively for 5 years, people want to throw out it's not just about the stars. It is, okay? It is about getting stars. It is about getting the most talented players, and it doesn't go a lot deeper than that. I mean, Michael makes a point that it's about having great coaches as well. The two usually go hand in hand. I mean, you're not getting the top flight talent unless you're at a top flight school, and you're not at a top flight school unless you're a really good coach. So, I mean, all those things kind of go hand in hand. So it's not a surprising list at all, and really it's not that surprising that Michigan's on there. I mean, if you're talking about Michigan not being able to recruit among the 13 top programs in the country, then what are you really talking about? I mean, Michigan can sell a lot of things that some schools can't. Battling geography a little bit in terms of recruiting grounds, but I'm not surprised that Michigan is on that list, and I think they should be.
I believe the exception, Michael, since you asked, is Clemson, 2016. Did not have 2 top 10 classes the previous 4 years.
But they had the best coach in college football. And, yeah, no, that's interesting. Certainly.
Well, let me throw another stat at you. NFL Combine invites went out last week. I talked about this at the top of the show here before you guys came on. Number 2, tied for the most Combine invites, Michigan, tied with Ohio State. LSU is number 1 at 16. So this isn't even counting, underclassmen that we know are going to be drafted likely a year from now, like an Aiden Hutchinson, a Nico Collins, for example. But LSU number 1 with 16 players invited to the NFL Scouting Combine. Michigan with 11, which did not include Mike Dana. Ohio State with 11, Alabama 10, Georgia 10, and Auburn, Notre Dame, and Utah at 9. Those are the schools with the most players invited to the NFL Scouting Combine. Here is a question I would like an answer to. If you guys have it, I'd love to know. In the 2017 draft, coming off the 2016 season, Michigan had more players drafted than any other school and lost 3 games. Michigan has the second most players invited to the NFL Scouting Combine in 2020. Last season, we lost 4 games. How do we, and those 4 games were, by the way, by an average of 18.7 points per loss. How do you do that, Michael? How do you lose 4 games by 18.7 points per game when you have the second most players invited to the NFL Scouting Combine? How does that happen?
Oh, man. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Honestly, we're all trying to figure it out, right? We're all trying to figure out why this program, in year 5 lost 4 games. We're trying to figure out why this program lost 3 games the year before that. I don't know. Football's hard, I guess, is all I got. But there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of talent on this Michigan football team. Jim Harbaugh had back-to-back top 8 classes, according to 24/7 Sports Composite, in 2016, 2017 classes, and I think if you went through there and you asked, out of those, I think it was 53 or 54 players that signed, how many of them realized their full potential at Michigan? You might say 5 or 6. Quarterback. I mean, it's the same things we've talked about over and over again. I mean, I think as we get in the off season, there's going to be lots of stats like you just presented, and talent arguments, and the combine, and all these different things. And yeah, I think a lot of Michigan fans are trying to rectify why their program hasn't achieved a little bit higher through 5 seasons. And if there was a simple answer, I think they would have a simple solution at this point. I guess I should say if it was a simple question, they'd have a simple solution at this point. But we're at where we're at, trying to diagnose Michigan. I'm not trying to sound like a sour bum here, but I don't have a great answer for you.
Brandon, you have any thoughts on this? And I want to go back again to that 2016 team. 19 players off of that team ended up on NFL training camp rosters that next August. 19. That team lost 3 games. How?
Yeah, I do have a couple of evidential supporting arguments here. How many of them were quarterbacks? 0.
Yeah.
How many of them were high flight wide receiver or running back talents in a day and age where scoring points is a must? None. How many of those were top 5, top 10, even top 20 NFL draft picks? A couple. I mean, Ohio State's about to have a guy drafted number 2 and number 3, and Michigan's probably not going to have a guy drafted in the first round. So 11 guys to the combine is cool, but if 6 or 7 or 8 of those guys are drafted in rounds 3, 4, 5, and 6,
sure,
that's apples and oranges. It's not the same thing.
Well, it's also why I didn't ask the question, though, framing it around Ohio State, but in general, how does a team with 19 and pros on it, not counting underclassmen, by the way, those are the guys in the senior class that were on training camp rosters, lost 3 times, and then this year's team with 11 guys at the NFL scouting combine lost 4 games by an average of 18 points per game. Their closest loss was by a touchdown. So I'm willing to defer on the Ohio State question because of the distinctions you're drawing. They're at an all-time high for them, and that's already an all-time high program. But still, how are you losing to other teams with this kind of talent?
I still think it's a talent gap. Whether guys are on the roster, NFL guys making teams, getting drafted. I think over the course of the last handful of years, if you were talking about elite guys that are going to be difference makers at the next level, there's one, and it's Devin Bush. That's it. If you start listing off guys from Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, LSU, probably after this year, you're going to come up with a lot more than one. And so I still think there's a gap. I mean, yeah, Michigan. I mean, man, if I hear Mike say this again, I might have to just get it on a recorder and hit a button. But it's good, not great. I mean, in so many different ways, at so many different positions, in so many different areas of the football program, it's really good, but it's not great. And I think that's how you explain it. I think switching gears to a new offense is certainly a step in the right direction. It took a little time to get it off the ground last year, but yeah, I still think there's a considerable gap in the kinds of talent, even though some of those numbers on paper look a little closer than you might think.
So because I know what's going to be in the comments section next, let's see if we can answer that objection preemptively. All right. Let me just name off some coaches. Lincoln Riley. I'll even take Nick Saban and Urban Meyer off the table because those are all-time statistical, generational, arguably the 2 greatest coaches in college football history, not named Frank Leahy, Knute Rockne, or Bear Bryant when you look at their resume. So let's take them off the table, okay? Lincoln Riley. Dabo's approaching that territory with those guys that I just mentioned, but probably isn't quite there yet. I could name several other coaches. If would those kinds of coaches have lost 3 games in 2016 and 4 games last year? And if the answer is yes, okay. And if the answer is no, well, then that is not okay, because I think that's the next question everybody has, right? I mean, would some other coaches have also lost 3 or 4 games with that kind of personnel? And looking at our own league, before the end of his downfall, would Mark D'Antonio had lost 3 or 4 games with those guys with those rosters? Would Kirk Ferentz have done it? Pat Fitzgerald have done it? I don't know. I'm asking because these are the kinds of questions that fans are asking. How would you guys respond to that? Brandon, I'll go back to you first this time.
The first thing that popped into my head when you started asking that question was the kind of numbers that a group of receivers like a Tariq Black, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Nico Collins, some of these young, speedy freshmen, some of the kind of numbers they might put up in a Lincoln Riley offense. Now, granted, the Big Ten is different than the Big 12 and the defenses that they face week in. I mean, it's not quite as simple as just, the transitive property, just move one coach here, move one coach here.
Yep.
But I think there's something to be said about the kind of numbers that Lincoln Riley has been able to generate with his different quarterbacks and his different skill positions. So I think the answer would be different for a couple guys. I don't think guys like Lincoln Riley and Dabo Swinney do lose the games that Jim Harbaugh has lost. But I think it's a little closer with guys like Kirk Ferentz and Pat Fitzgerald and Mark D'Antonio. To me, those guys aren't elite. They're not in the same discussion. They're not in the same conversation as the guys who consistently make the playoffs year in and year out. I mean, there's a reason why they're there. So that's a really interesting question. I think there are a lot of layers to it. But we've been pretty open that we're pretty disappointed in what Jim Harbaugh has been able to do in 5 years. And I think that's exactly why, because he has had pretty good talent. I don't think it's on the level of some of those teams I named earlier, Ohio State, but yeah, losing 3 or 4 games and by the margins that he has, it's unacceptable. And I don't know how even Jim Harbaugh himself would tell you anything different.
What do you think, Michael?
I don't know. It's hard. It's the Lincoln Riley argument. I mean, he certainly had some very prolific offenses. He's also had some very dynamic quarterbacks. When Jalen Hurts is considered the worst quarterback that he's had in his 3 seasons, that says something about the guys that he's had. I mean, would he have brought in, someone special? Would he have gone to Dylan McCaffrey? I don't know. I don't think, this is not meant as like this is all on Shea Patterson's shoulders. But I don't know that, he wins as high, as consistently as he did at Oklahoma with Shea Patterson as his quarterback. Some of the other guys, I agree with Brandon. I mean, if you want to go through like a name coaches like Kirk Ferentz or Pat Fitzgerald or the guy at Oregon whose name escapes me, like I don't think
Mario Cristobal is at Oregon. Jimbo Fisher, with those guys have lost 3 or 4 games with those rosters. Yeah, that's the question.
Right. I mean, I honestly think like if you could take Urban, Nick, Dabo, and Ryan Day, and you swap them out, like maybe you've got an argument. But those are the best of the best for a reason, and everybody else is trying to get into that stratosphere. And I've thought a lot about like where Jim Harbaugh is. Like, I don't think he's certainly not one of the top 5 coaches in the game, but I think that there's this gigantic gray area between like probably number 6 and number 20, where you could put any one of those guys at 6. You could put any one of those guys at 20. Is he the 6th best coach? Sure, depending on who you're asking. Is he the 20th best coach? Sure, depends on who you're asking. And all those rest of those guys, I mean, every single one of those fan bases, Oregon's sitting there going, my God, if we didn't lose this game to Arizona State late in the season, we're in the national championship college, or we're in the playoff. And other programs are looking out there, Texas A&M going like, we kind of expect to do a little bit faster. And Georgia with Kirby Smart saying, hey, we were there a couple of years ago with Jake Fromm as a freshman. How come we can't get back to there with Jake Fromm as a junior? So there's really 3 or 4 dominant programs in college football, and the rest of the landscape is all trying to get there and wondering why their guy or their team or their talent hasn't been able to elevate to the Saban, to the Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State level.
What's the number one reason, before we move on to basketball, what's the number one reason that you guys would offer Michigan fans this offseason that 2020 can be different?
Mike, go ahead. Knock yourself out on that one.
Honestly, the number one thing I would say is year 2 of the Josh Gaddis offense. There were definitely areas that Michigan showed some progress late in the season. I don't think as much progress as they were given credit for. Ohio State, I mean, they couldn't run the football. And once Shea kind of got off kilter a little bit, everything fell apart in the passing game. And Alabama, they had some moments, but they weren't able to capitalize and put those, put touchdowns up. But if you're looking at it and you think that you've got some explosive athletes in Nico Collins, Ronnie Bell, Giles Jackson, Mike Sainristil, you think you have something special brewing in the ground game with Hassan Haskins and Charbonnet, and whether it's Chris Evans or Corum, and you really like your quarterbacks, then what I would say is Michigan has an opportunity to be a much more high-scoring offense in 2020. And if you can put up 42 points per game, and when you play Ohio State and you play Washington in the opener and you play Wisconsin and you play Penn State again, and you're scoring, at least against Penn State, Wisconsin, and Washington, if you're scoring north of 35 points, chances are I think you're going to win all those games. Against Ohio State, you're going to have to score 56 or more to win that game, which is possible if this quarterback position really takes off. So I would think that's the biggest reason to be hopeful, is that the offense has a chance to have a really high ceiling.
Brandon?
That was my thought, was the second year of Josh Gaddis, and just the hope that there will be some addition by subtraction by not having Shea Patterson be the quarterback anymore. I mean, we've gone up and down all season about how much he left out there and what were the reasons he wasn't as good, and we heard some off-season stuff, and there's been even more developments that have come out that Mike has touched on and hinted at before as to why it didn't quite click for him, why he wasn't replaced, why Dylan McCaffrey didn't get a shot. I mean, there's a lot that kind of went on, it seems like, but that's no more. So now you get a chance to turn the page and see what you've got with Dylan McCaffrey or Joe Milton, and see if these guys are a little bit more dynamic. Both are better runners. Certainly Joe Milton has a much better arm. I think McCaffrey's arm is probably comparable to Patterson's, but you just hope that turning the page and looking at a new chapter with a new quarterback in the second year in a new system, that will all improve. And again, I referenced it earlier, like, you've got to score. Like, today's college football is about scoring points, not about shutting teams out. So you just hope that year two under Gaddis is better, and you hope that that whoever the quarterback is going to be is better than what Shea Patterson is and brings a more dynamic element to the offense, especially down the field. And I think even running the ball, too, as a threat, running the ball from the quarterback position, because we just didn't see that much from Shea Patterson this year.
Let's switch gears, talk some basketball. Massive win for Michigan on Saturday against Michigan State. When you look at one of the most decorated recruiting visit days for the basketball program I can ever remember. Then you throw in the 3 losses in a row at home. You had lost 4 in a row to Sparty. Maybe you're one loss. So you're kind of what I call this time of year, you're not in the bubble, but you're on the spittle. Like, they're getting ready to blow your bubble. Okay, and so they were on the spittle and they avoid the bubble. And now, you look at some of their numbers and Isaiah Livers coming back, and you start thinking now maybe it could be a springboard. Let me throw some numbers at you guys. Michigan State held to its season worst shooting percentage against Michigan on Saturday. Michigan now has held 5 of its last 6 opponents to less than a point per possession. That's an elite defensive number, similar to what they were doing the last couple of years of the John Beilein, Luke Yaklich tandem. It looks like they've definitely evolved from the drop coverage against screens. We're seeing hedging, switching, and I think you've seen the defensive numbers even before the return of Isaiah Livers increase. With Isaiah Livers, Michigan is averaging about 85 points a game this year. Without him, they're averaging barely 67. When you look at quad 1 wins, there's only 4 teams in college basketball that have more. Michigan has 6 of those right now. Michigan State only has 2. I mean, it is possible, by the way, depending on what happens with Michigan State, according to Ken Baum, the rest of their schedule, but 1 game is against a Tier A opponent, and they're only 2-7 in Tier A games. I mean, if Michigan finishes strong here, they could finish with a better NCAA tournament resume than Michigan State, the preseason number 1 team. And that would have been absolutely unthinkable in October, let alone even a month ago. And this is only Juwan Howard's first season. So I know you don't want to get ahead of your skis in a league that has 11 of the top 33 teams. And Ken Baum, you're just 1 game away from a losing streak in the Big Ten. But that was a massive win, Michael Spath.
Oh, yeah. And you just laid out a pretty nice case, both for their NCAA tournament resume. But you want to talk about where this rivalry is between Michigan and Michigan State. I mean, let's face it, Michigan State should have dominated Michigan in both matchups this year. Michigan State should be, they should have, 2 or fewer losses in conference play right now. I know that it's very competitive in the Big Ten this season, but they were supposed to have a lineup, a roster that was, superior, experienced, and talented than anybody else in the conference. They have the best player in the Big Ten in the last 2 years. And once again, I know this isn't a Spartan podcast, but once again, I just feel like Tom Izzo is underutilizing his talent. And there's quite a few other people, quite a few Michigan State fans that I know feel the same way because my father-in-law is a big Spartan, and he tells me that all the time. Yeah, Juwan Howard has Michigan on equal footing with Michigan State in his first season, and that's a hell of an accomplishment. And the rivalry, we talked about it on the show this week. I mean, Xavier Simpson getting the last laugh, kind of like the Cassius Simpson battles. I know they didn't really match up head-to-head in this game, but he can walk away with the final victory. I mean, there's a lot to really like about this game. I think you put either massive win in your headline on Wolverine Digest. And I have to completely agree with that. I don't whatever term you refer to as the biggest it can be. That's what I would say this win was over Michigan State.
Brandon, what do you think? Is it was this a get off the schneid, or do you think this could also be a springboard for Michigan down the stretch here of less than 5 weeks until Selection Sunday?
Yeah, I think it was huge too. And Steve, my favorite stat that you just threw out was the Isaiah Livers stat. That's almost 20-point differential between when he's in the lineup and when he's not. And that's why I chose to talk about it after the game. I thought it was really disingenuous and really short-sighted by Tom Izzo when he was asked, a pretty standard question from, you've got media people from both markets in the press conference after the game. And so for a Michigan reporter to ask, hey, coach, what do you think about Michigan's lineup when Livers is on the floor? And he can't even give you an answer. He says, Isaiah Livers didn't beat us today. We kind of beat ourselves. And how about Michigan State's lineup if we had Josh Langford? Hey,
you mean they went to the Final Four last year without Josh Langford? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm quit being a punk and just answer the question. You just got beat. Isaiah Livers is one of the best players in the conference, and you can say that, and it's okay. But he wouldn't do that, and it really rubbed me the wrong way. But I think Isaiah Livers scored 14 points and had 7 boards. It wasn't like he absolutely blew up the stat sheet, but there were timely shots. His communication on defense, allowing Brandon Johns to return to a perfect role for him as a bench player, coming in and giving 10 or 15 spark minutes. I think he scored 7 points and had 6 rebounds or so, 7 or 5, something like that. It just rounds Michigan's roster out so much that they become a very dangerous team. He's a much more of a threat from deep. His mid-range game is better. I mean, it just makes them much more harder to guard, and it makes them much better at guarding. So I think if Isaiah Livers can remain healthy and he can give 30 minutes a night, as he gets back into basketball shape, and hopefully the groin doesn't flare up and bother him again, that this team can be pretty damn good down the stretch. You'd still like to see a little bit more out of John Teskey, but everybody else is firing on pretty much all cylinders at this point, and kind of peaking at the right time, like you said, with 5 weeks or 8 games or however you want to look at it here ahead of the Big Ten tournament.
One of the struggles for me when you do this daily for a living, and you guys do it as well. One of the struggles is sometimes the simple can elude you because every day you've got to provide content, and it's really hard just to keep repeating yourself. And so you're looking for angles, are there nuances, things I'm missing? And we've all done, all three of us at Wolverine Digest, and both of you on your radio programs there in Ann Arbor, ample analysis of Michigan's lost month in January. How much of it, though, is really just as simple as either Isaiah Livers or Joe Wieskamp is the best wing player in the Big Ten Conference? Michigan didn't have him except for a little more than 1/2 against Illinois for the entire month of January. And that's why they went 4-6. How much of it is really just, there were substitution pattern errors, and we pointed those out. All those things are there, but there really is no such thing as a perfect game. And when you're missing such a monumental player, that a guy that, depending on who your opponent is, can, when you're switching on defense, cover 4 out of the 5 positions on the floor, which grows your margin for error incredibly. How much of it really, guys, was just they didn't have Isaiah Livers, and you're only playing 5 at a time. And when one of your best 5 is out, that's at least 20% of your best talent pool that's gone. And you're going to miss that guy a lot, particularly in a league that has 11 of the top 33 teams in KenPom, and you have no nights off. Was it just that simple?
It might have been, Steve, and I'd be really curious what this season would have looked like if Isaiah Livers was healthy the entire time. But that is not the case. That's not what happened for Michigan basketball. And I guess the good news for Michigan is if is if over these last 8 games of the regular season, at least one game in the Big Ten tournament, we get to see what this team is capable of. I mean, when you look at what happened in November when they won the Battle for Atlantis championship and they were firing all cylinders, that was as good of a basketball team as there was in the game. Can they beat that team? Probably not to that level. They're not a top 5, top 10 team, but are they one of the top 25 teams in college basketball? Are they in a legitimate Sweet 16 team? I guess we're going to find out, and hopefully there's no more setbacks for Livers or for the rest of this Michigan basketball team, because I think we could be on the cusp of really seeing them go off for like a nice little run. Not saying they're going to go 7-1 or 6-2, but I don't think it's impossible for them to go 5-3 in these last 8 games and really kind of showcase what they're capable of.
Brandon, you get the last word.
I mean, it does sound pretty simple, but I think there's just so many ripple effects when you lose a guy like Livers. I mean, I talked about earlier in the season during that stretch when Juwan was referencing the lack of communication on defense. Livers is outstanding at that. Him and Xavier Simpson, they run the show. They run the show on the defensive end of the floor in terms of talking and communicating and having experience and getting guys where they're supposed to be. You mentioned Livers kind of being able to guard almost 1 through 5, really. So he knows a little bit of everything. He can direct traffic a little bit back there for everybody. Certainly bring a guy like Franz Wagner along, who's a freshman still figuring it out on a lot of levels. And then you mentioned also the weird rotations. I mean, I think Isaiah Livers shores that up so much because now you've got a couple of true 5s in John Teske and Austin Davis, who, I mean, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention him a little bit as to what Michigan's doing right now and the last few games and just what he's been able to provide off the bench. So you've got 2 true 5s in Austin Davis and John Teske. You've got 2 true 4s in Isaiah Livers and Brandon Johns. You've got Colin Castleton sitting there who's barely played but can kind of do both. It just bringing Livers back in for 30 minutes, it just cements the rotations, I think. And I think Juwan Howard is still figuring that out a little bit, but when you remove that big of a chunk, it can leave you reeling a little bit, especially through the 4 and 5 positions and even the 3 a little bit because Isaiah Livers is so versatile. So I'm with Mike. It would be really interesting to see if you could go back and see how the games are in January if Isaiah Livers was in the lineup, but he wasn't. So you try to find a silver lining. You got Brandon Johns, 9 starts. He's playing more confidently than he ever would have had he not been in that role. And so now you just kind of move forward and see what you can do over these last 8 games. I think 4 very, very winnable games tomorrow night at Northwestern, and then 3 home games. And then, I mean, shoot, it's not like the Purdues of the world or the Ohio States of the world are unbeatable even at their place. So I'm really excited to see how the team looks down the stretch, and I think Livers coming back, it might have really been that simple. Just keep him healthy and keep him in the lineup and see what this team could be.
Great stuff as always, guys. Thanks for joining us again here this week on Michigan Podcast. And folks, make sure you tune in each weekday morning at WTKA-Ann in Arbor. You can listen to that on the iHeartRadio app as well. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. Take care. Don't forget to read them at Wolverine Digest too. More in a moment. Don't forget, you can stay up to date with everything we talk about here on Michigan Podcast in between episodes by visiting our website at wolverinedigest.com. Again, that's wolverinedigest.com. Myself, Michael Spath, and Brandon Brown keep you up to date each and every day on everything trending and happening with the Maize and Blue. So again, if you want to stay up to date on those Michigan Wolverines, go to wolverinedigest.com. Again, that's wolverinedigest.com. This week's Twitter poll, we asked you, what word best describes your thoughts on Michigan making this year's NCAA basketball tournament? 13.5% of you said lock. 56% of you said probable. That would be my answer. 23.8% said questionable. 6.7% of you said doubtful. I have to believe that's just the amount of fans of other teams we have, because you have one of the highest amount of quad 1 wins, and there's only 4 weeks to go in the season. You're not doubtful to make the NCAA tournament. All right, you're in pretty good shape. That brings us to our question of the week. This is from Cody Engel, who asks, what would happen if whomever is the new Sparty coach won the Big Ten before Jim Harbaugh does? Wouldn't happen. It's not possible. It's just not. And the reason why is the league is too tough. The division is too hard. It wouldn't happen. But if it did, it would be Jim Harbaugh's final season. I mean, it'd be inexcusable. So I don't. It's a great question, Cody, but I think it has very little chance of happening when you look at Michigan State's current recruiting base and you look at the strength of the East Division and you look at programs like Indiana are improving now. You know, I don't think Mike Loxley can coach his way out of a paper bag, but he's recruiting pretty well. So, no, I don't think it would happen. But if it did, I think that would probably be the end of the Jim Harbaugh era. Thank you for tuning in this week on Michigan Podcast. Please like, rate, subscribe, share, as is germane to whichever platform you access us from. That helps us to get the word out. Absolutely it does. So please keep those 5-star reviews coming, those subscribes and likes here on YouTube as well. Don't forget to follow us at Michigan Podcast all the time to keep updated on our thoughts on Michigan sports breaking news. And you can also read all of our stuff every week at WolverineDigest.com. Until next time, I'm Steve Deace, and go Blue.